Order. I thank the member for Macquarie. I call the member for Chifley.
Thanks, Acting Deputy Speaker. And it's good to be in a chamber where I have an opportunity to share some time with some colleagues from Western Sydney, some who have passionately fought on an issue that I've spoken about, others who are realising that the nirvana that's going to lob on their doorstep isn't necessarily going to help their area, and that is the issue of Badgerys Creek. I note the member for Macarthur here, a once staunch supporter, or opponent I should say, has become a muted supporter of the airport, and the member for Macquarie, whose constituents will no doubt be very interested about the environmental impact of an airport in the region operating 24 hours a day, as will the member for Mitchell, who occupies the Deputy Speaker's role tonight. And I'm careful not to make any reflections, Deputy Speaker. I'm wise up to that. But certainly the Deputy Speaker in other places has voiced rightly a concern about the impact on his community of a 24-hour-a-day no-curfew airport. An airport that has been pushed by a coalition of eastern suburbs interests who've deigned to tell the western suburbs what's good for us, not necessarily content in giving us the infrastructure we actually need or the services that we actually need. We're told that the best thing to create jobs in our region is an airport of the variety that's being pushed by the coalition. Now, the coalition in government and the Abbott government has managed to cut education spending, $270 million cut from schools in the Chifley electorate over the next 10 years, replicated. It's the highest figure in Western Sydney, but there are a number of electorates that are also affected by that. They've changed, for example, the higher education funding, and we'll see 40% of funds going to universities cut and fees increase for the people of the region who are going to UWS, who've been undermined there. Health spending cut, and in our area, vital health infrastructure removed. But there's $1.5 billion for an airport that we didn't ask for. There's also all this money for roads around the airport, and not necessarily dealing with the congestion issues that affect Western Sydney, but mainly to deal with the congestion that will arise out of this airport. And so that money stands there, and we're told that the reason we have to support it is because of jobs. We're told that 60,000 jobs would be created, which is just ridiculous, given that Sydney Airport has just under 30,000 jobs for 28 million movements. You cannot tell me that a single runway airport in Western Sydney will create 60,000 jobs as opposed to the 3-runway configuration in the gateway of Sydney at Sydney Airport. The reality is it's going to be 5,000 jobs for quite some period of time. For a region that has nearly 2 million people, 5,000 jobs, or roughly 1 job for every 400 residents of Western Sydney, I'm happy for those to quibble if they think the figure's different. I don't think it's going to be much more different than that. So it's either 5,000 jobs or 60,000 jobs. It can't be both. And it's either a 1-runway configuration delivering 5,000 jobs, or it's something bigger that will deliver 60,000. Either way, people are being fed a lot of nonsense and not being told the truth and not being given fact. And I want to come to this point of fact as well, because it is important that fact be utilised and deployed on this issue that will impact on the lives of many people in Western Sydney when they're not getting the services and infrastructure they need across our region, and are being told that the money that's being cut out of health, infrastructure, education is going to be devoted to an airport generating 5,000 jobs that will stick that way for 5,000 years. Now, some of the people that have come on board to this project that have previously been in opposition are people like, for example, UWS, which understood previously that this wasn't the best project around. But you have Chris Brown, the Western Sydney resident who lives in Birchgrove, who also sits on the UWS board, has done a very good lobbying effort on that board to ensure that the new Vice-Chancellor cops onto this notion that he'll support the airport. And what irony that UWS, which will see its funding cut and will be forced to cut jobs itself, and will also be forced to lift fees on the very people that it has a mandate to represent in Western Sydney to ensure they get higher education, will support an airport and see the money that's gone from the university be plugged into the airport. And that is quite ironic to see that actually happen. We've also seen the Sydney Business Chamber, represented by David Borger. I remember standing shoulder to shoulder with David when he represented residents and he was opposed to the airport. now that he represents business interests. It's good to see that his consistency has been maintained and that he's stood up for the residents of Western Sydney. No such thing. He's now come out on and been pushing the airport, changed from his role as a mayor, now representing business interests and now pushing the airport. What's interesting is this is the longest death siren signal for Parramatta, because quite frankly, getting an airport in southwest Sydney compared and also combined with the growth of the Southwest Growth Centre over there will see economic activity shift from that part of Western Sydney to having economic activity lift in southwest Sydney, and it'll be interesting to see what role Parramatta will have in years to come. Frankly, when I did raise the point about the need for us to think carefully about urban development in the southwest and to ensure that we had a CBD that was properly planned, allowed for good people movement, good long-term jobs, and provided a new focus for economic activity in our area, David Borger labelled that the most stupid idea he'd ever heard. But when you consider what Badgerys, if it does go ahead, will do to Parramatta, and he's supposed to lobby for Parramatta's interests, I'd have to say supporting Badgerys in his position probably equates in the same or deserves the same sort of condemnation he's ready to lash out to others. The most important thing that needs to be borne in mind, I made reference to the point about fact. What is interesting to see, and I note the presence, as I said earlier, of the member for Macarthur, and I note the Deputy Speaker's spoken about the impact of this airport on the amenity of his constituents, rightly so, and I also note, though she's not here, the member for Macquarie. When are we going to get an environmental impact statement on this airport? The last one was done in 1997, and anyone who's lived in Western Sydney knows, for any extended period of time, the face of our region has changed remarkably. It has opened up to development as more and more young families go out west, and they made decisions on the basis that both political parties opposed the development of Badgerys Creek, and they saw new estates open up. They can rightly quibble about the speed at which infrastructure development matched growth in residential terms, but it has changed. And in that part of Western Sydney, with the topography being the way it is, hemmed in by the Great Dividing Range, and the Cumberland Plains being as flat as they are, and Western Sydney having some of the highest rates of asthma in the country, and you worry about what might happen in terms of air quality in that area. You might worry about the impact of a 24-hour facility in certain parts of Western Sydney as well. And we have heard nothing about an environmental impact statement to update the 1997 statement that was brought down. Heard nothing. We've had a lot of people, for instance, cheer about the fact that there are contractors on site, there are surveyors on site at Badgerys, and all this work's happening. All this money's been committed to roadworks in that area, but no one has had the decency to actually say when the environmental impact statement will come out. Now, I've heard rumours from those opposite that there is a suggestion that there will be no EIS, and if they are just rumours, then they be that. But there certainly needs to be clarity about whether or not there will be an EIS. And in fact, I went to a briefing that was called by the Deputy Prime Minister that the Deputy Prime Minister failed to attend himself, where when this question was put forward, the department seemed to suggest that there might not be an environmental impact statement, that it might be refreshed via a desktop study, a desktop evaluation. That is simply no excuse for the requirement that the proper work, that the analysis be undertaken, and to ensure that the people of Western Sydney, in having had this monstrosity forced upon them, this white elephant that is going to suck up billions of taxpayer dollars, that at the same time as losing out on health, education and infrastructure spend, that they're also, as a result of that, not have the environmental impact from this airport operating in that way. Because frankly, the EIS should tell us whether or not we're facing a 1 or 3 runway configuration in that area and what the environmental impact of that will be, and let the people of Western Sydney know fully what will what impact will be placed upon them. But again, it's simply a rush for publicity by this government to try and keep Eastern Sydney interests happy, and they're aided and abetted by Western Sydney Liberal representatives who have failed to stand up for their constituencies and instead have just let the government roll this proposal out and see the longer-term interests of the region impacted in this way.